Francis is a botanist at USDA Agricultural Research Service, National Germplasm Resources Laboratory in Beltsville, Maryland, where she develops and implements projects that conserve plant genetic resources. She's also currently serves as the North American Plant Red List Authority and has collaborated on many conservation status assessment projects. Previously, she was the lead botanist for NatureServe for over almost 11 years. Nan McCarry is a freelance ethnobotanist from Leesburg, Virginia, who is interested in traditional agricultural systems and especially in crop wild relatives. She works at Watermark Woods Native Plants in Hamilton, Virginia, and previously she facilitated Landscape for Life class, encouraging homeowners to landscape more sustainability, and also worked with NatureServe to put together a workshop on conservation of the native grapes of North America. Please join me in welcoming Anne and Nan, who will be speaking to us today about collaborating to conserve North American grapes, the Vitis species.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and you can see me?
Yep, we can see
Okay.
both of you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you again. We're so excited to share our work on Vitis that's taken place over several years, actually. And I'm going to start off and then pass it over to Nan. We're going to switch back and forth a couple of times. The first thing that we're going to start with is a quiz, a pop quiz. So this is really just meant to have some fun. So you can use the QR code if it works from the screen, but there's also a link to the quiz that I think will be dropped in the chat. And while we're getting that set up, I'm just going to
Do you have the link to that?
Oh, I did send it to you in Teams.
Okay, hold on a second.
But let me see. Here it is. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to copy it, not delete it. Okay. Sorry, I don't know what I'm sharing right now, but okay. Hopefully that worked. And what are you all seeing? Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
We're seeing it in presenter in
Yeah. Is that better?
Yep.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. And are you guys taking the quiz?
Very funny.
It's okay.
Great. It's
pretty funny. Okay. Anyway, okay, so you're doing the quiz. After that, we're going to talk about the domesticated grape and its crop wild relatives. We'll speak a little bit about the workshop that was held last year and the outcomes from that workshop. Nan is going to talk about some of our noteworthy native grapes, and then we will wrap it up. So before actually we go on to the rest, I want to show we only have 11 quiz responses so far. Come on, guys. Average time to complete 1 minute. All right. They're starting to come in. And I'm going to change my share so that we can actually see the quiz results. Give me 1 sec. Okay. Names here and okay, 25 responses. Thanks for playing along. So the first question is, how do you pronounce Vitis? And it looks like, and usually for once I'm in the majority because I say Vitis and so do 21 other people. But at our grape workshop, I think it was split even Vitis which makes sense because we call it viticulture, not viticulture. And then the other ones are just silly. Okay, what are some uses of grapes native to North America? Um, so the answer, there's no right answer here. I mean, really, I was looking for all of the above, but in general, its biggest use is as a crop wild relative, usually for graft stock, but not always for Vitis vinifera. However, Vitis rotundifolia, the muscadine grape, is actually used as a crop. So that is also correct. Tripping mechanism for field botanists, that just depends on whether you're as clumsy as I am. And yeah. Okay, question number 3. What is the rarest Vitis species in the United States at the species level? So we were looking here for Vitis rupestris, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the talk. Okay, what is a scion? You guys are too smart. You knew that we were going for shoot, the shoot tissue. But it actually means an heir or descendant. That's the official definition. And it is a type of Toyota. Okay. And where were grapes first domesticated? So there were 2 possible answers, Western Asia and the Caucasus, although this is a topic that has been debated. The most recent study that came out that I read showed 2 areas of domestication rather than just one. So we thought we would put that in there. Okay. I always forget how quiet it is when you're giving a Zoom presentation. It's really hard to judge people's reactions. I'm sorry. I need to share the PowerPoint now. Okie doke. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so from here, I'm actually going to turn it over to Nan, and she is going to talk a little bit about crop wild relatives and the domesticated grape.
Hi, thanks, Anne. So excited to be here. So for those of you who might not know, a crop wild relative is a plant occurring in the wild that is closely related to a crop species. These are very important for agriculture. Every crop has them. Sometimes it's the progenitor, and often it's just wild and weedy plants. And they're incredibly important and not really known about enough. So you can see a little bit about that here. And when we talk about crop wild relatives, I want to get to, oh wait, I'm sorry, could you forward it? I was
next
trying
slide.
to forward
Okay.
it. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. There we go.
Okay, and then let's just talk about Vitis a little bit, the genus, and it's in the family Vitaceae. And there's about 75 species worldwide. Many of them, as you can see here, are in Asia. There's about 35 species in the Americas, and in the work we were doing, we focused on North America and Canada, and there's about 25 taxa in North America. In North America, if you consider United States and Canada. So you could forward that, please. I think we're missing one. If you can go back. Domesticated, yeah. Okay, so before we talk about crop wild relatives, we just want to talk about the domesticated grape, Vitis vinifera. In this case, Anne mentioned muscadines, and that's a minor crop, but most of the wine you would be drinking worldwide or grapes you would be eating, it's pretty much going to come from Vitis vinifera in most cases. So we have the one main domesticate, there were, as Anne was saying, there are 2 domestications. This research came out this spring. that around 11,000 years ago. It's thought that in places around 500 miles apart in the country of Georgia and in the Eastern Mediterranean, that there were two domestications. And like many crops, though, humans were using them for quite a while before domestication came about. And cultivation was not happening as much because the situations during the Pleistocene didn't lend themselves to agriculture, but they were used for quite a long time before domestication came about. A domesticated crop is genetically different from its wild progenitor. That's part of the definition of being domesticated. So we're going to talk about phylloxera. So one of the fascinating things about grapes is they could be said to be the first use of a crop wild relative to save an industry. And many of you may be familiar with the phylloxera epidemic in Europe in the late 1800s. So phylloxera is a little aphid-like insect. And on the left, you see phylloxera infecting Native American vines. And so it infects the leaf and causes these nodosities, but it doesn't kill the plant. But in Europe, in Vitis vinifera, the phylloxera gets into the root and kills the root and kills the whole plant. It really almost caused the decline of the entire industry. And so after trying many different things, they came up with the idea of breeding rootstock from Native American grapes that would form the rootstock for the European grapevine. So if you want to advance, in case anybody's rusty on this, we just wanted to go over for our woody perennials. Most of our woody perennial crops have the rootstock and the scion, and then they could be different species. So we can just go on. So in this case, here we see the grapevine, the rootstock, and the scion is Vitis vinifera, or it could be a hybrid of Vitis vinifera and one of our native grapes. And in the rootstock, we see three species. These are Native American species, Vitis riparia and Vitis rupestris. Those were the first two that were chosen to breed for the rootstock to save the industry from phylloxera. And then this third one, Vitis berlandieri, was bred in a little later because it's adapted to the limestone soils that are in many European vineyards because it's native to the Edwards Plateau of Texas. So these three species are really important. They pretty much from then on formed the basis of most of the rootstock used worldwide. And so you can see already we're getting into the genetic similarity or uniformity that we're only using these three species. There are other species used in rootstock too, but they say that most of the rootstock used worldwide is based on these three species. And not only that, but it's one study said that 39% of the rootstock actually only came from 3 accessions from these 3 species. So it's a very narrow selection of those native grapes that formed all the rootstock used worldwide, and this is a problem. And this is because, when you're in a crisis, you're going to select what you have at hand. You're not going to do an extensive survey of everything you could possibly use. But that's why researchers like these here are calling for a more extensive exploration of conservation and then exploration of the genetic diversity in these species going forward, especially with climate change. I just wanted to talk a little, now that we're talking about pests, because with crop wild relatives, the point is you want to be able to combat the biotic and abiotic stresses that that crops are going to be exposed to. And of course, as we know, crops are very genetically uniform compared to their wild relatives. And in this case, this is just a slide that we had at the workshop that Anne's going to tell you about, by Mizuho Nita, and he's a researcher here in Virginia. I happen to live in Virginia. And this is just some of the biotic stressors that the Virginia wine growers would be facing. These are mostly the fungal pathogens, of which we have many, because of course Vitis vinifera didn't evolve in an environment like many of the ones we have in the United States, and so we're growing in places where it's not adapted to grow. So along with this, you have other biotic and abiotic stressors that we're not even going to go into yet. So that leads us to the workshop, which Anne will tell you about.
Thanks, Nan. So this picture shows most of the workshop participants. It took place at Oak Spring Garden it's like a year ago to the week. If you've never been to Oak Spring Garden and you have an opportunity, I highly recommend it. It is one of the most beautiful places to visit, and it's also just a really special place to have a workshop. In that there aren't that many distractions. You really have the opportunity to do concentrated work with a small group of people in a beautiful setting, and everybody talks about how amazing the food is, which is true. It's all farm to table, much of it from their own garden. So I want to just back up a minute and say that this workshop was many years in the making, and it morphed and evolved, not just the workshop, but the project and the people working on it. One of the reasons why it was in the works for many years was because of the pandemic. So it was postponed twice. And so when we were finally able to get together last year in person, it just seemed like a real gift, a triumph that we actually made the workshop happen. When we were originally planning the workshop, I was at NatureServe, and I was really thinking about native grapes from that conservation lens that that I would think of at NatureServe. How many species are imperiled? Um,
We can't hear you.
oh, you can't hear me?
All of a
Now we
sudden it
can.
cut out.
That's weird. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, what happened was that I changed jobs, and now I'm at the USDA, which is a very nice uh, parallel to the crop wild relative work I started doing at NatureServe. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to bring this project with me, and incredibly fortunate that all of the partners were willing to keep going as well. So, first of all, the Oak Spring Garden Foundation offered to host us, which was an incredible gift. The U.S. Botanic Garden stepped in early with funding that was desperately needed to even get this, off the ground. NatureServe contributed a tremendous amount, not just from staff time, but also helping to run a Thursday evening reception event that we're not going to talk about in this presentation. And finally, USDA, found the space for me to continue to work on this. So it's a lot of talking. Let's go on to the next slide. We really wanted to bring together an interdisciplinary group of people because I knew my bias was from the conservation side, and I knew that I did not have all of the pieces I needed to understand grapes from an agricultural perspective and to really make this link between the native grapes as crop wild relatives for the cultivated grape. Um, so you can see the list of people who attended and sort of read over and see we really tried to recruit people from different sectors. Um, but what I'm going to do while you're looking over that is I wanted to play a short video clip for you. This is Dr. Allison Miller. Some of you might know she was supposed to be giving this presentation today, but she was unable to make it. So I recorded a small video clip of her reflecting on the workshop. I'm going to play it, and hopefully you'll be able to see it and hear it. You can't hear? No. Okay. Um, hmm. All right. I am trying to remember how I figured this out last time. But what I'm going to do is move on and then we'll come back to it if I can figure out how to play it. Um, so, okay. So the way that we designed the workshop was we followed the format and the framework of a roadmap that had been published by Colin Corey et al. It's a roadmap for conserving crop wild relatives of the U.S. And so we adopted that framework to grapes and structured our meeting that way. So the major goals of this roadmap are to document crop wild relatives and utilized species, to protect them in their natural habitats, to collect and conserve the diversity of species that are high priority. So that's XC2, conservation, to make the collections accessible for plant breeding, research, and education, and to raise awareness of the value of crop wild relatives and their conservation needs. So, in terms of documenting North America's crop wild relatives and grapes in this case, I thought a lot about, along NatureServe lines, and the questions that we ask ourselves: what is it, where is it, and how is it doing? So that was a primary objective for this workshop, was to try to answer those questions. So just to get us started talking about some of the native grapes, these are two maps on the left side. These are model distributions of grapes native to North America used in rootstock breeding. And on the right side, it's the same, except these species are used for scion breeding. And this comes from Claire Heinitz's book chapter on grapes that was published in 2019. So getting a little bit into the what is it, or the taxonomy, this is an area where some groups have changed quite a bit and others haven't. So I'll start from the top and say that there are two subgenera to consider. The first is Muscadinia, and that has Vitis rotundifolia, the muscadine grape, and also Vitis popenoii, which occurs in Mexico. The next subgenus is Vitis, which has the rest of the groups. I took most of this from a paper by Talavera et al. That came out this summer. This is June Wen's postdoc, I believe. So they delineated the various groups in subgenus Vitis and the species in those groups. I'm not going to go through all of them. The ones that have an asterisk are endemic to Mexico, and so we're not actually covering them in this talk. You'll see some groups have just one species, like Californica has Vitis californica and Vitis palmata has Vitis palmata. And other groups, like the Occidentalis group, has a lot of species. In terms of taxonomic change, where we're seeing the most is in the two groups of Estivalis and Cineraria. So in Estivalis, we have two varieties that have been elevated to species, Vitis lincecumii and Vitis rufotomentosa. There still seems to be some confusion about the two varieties of Estivalis and bicolor. Variety argentifolia is found to be synonymous with bicolor, so that's not included. Oopsie. And the other area where we're seeing taxonomic change is in the Cineraria complex, where we have, again, species that were elevated. So Vitis simpsonii, Baileyana, Berlandieri, and of course, Cineraria. So we also wanted to do conservation status assessments. Most of you are familiar with NatureServe system, but basically we try to assess the conservation status of species by looking at them essentially on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most imperiled and 5 being the most secure. The map that we're looking at here is Vitis rupestris, which is a G3 vulnerable, and this is the rarest species that we have at the species level. You can see that it is quite rare in some states. This species has a patchy distribution because it occurs mostly on river scours or rivers where there's disturbance. And with changes to hydrology and other threats, the species seems to be declining in this northern part of its range. So this is one to watch and one where we'd love more information on the actual status and threats. Looking at Vitis overall, this is a genus where we have to think differently about conservation, and that is for two reasons. One, the vast majority of species are widespread and secure, or apparently secure. So G5, which is the most secure, has these 5 species. We have a whole bunch of G4s. So I'm sorry, I don't know why this keeps advancing. Overall, these species are not, threatened with extinction. They're not rare species that we would really put a lot of effort into conserving. However, they are important as crop wild relatives, and there may be populations within these wide-ranging species that are important to conserve. So that's where we want to explore a little bit more. Vitis rupestris, since we're talking about it, is one of the 3 species used as rootstock for phylloxera. It is G3, as I mentioned, and it's threatened by changes in stream bank morphology. It's threatened by grazing in certain areas, and it used to have a larger range. This is one of the species that's more shrubby than viney in nature. And so in terms of the assessments, we have done preliminary draft assessments for all the species, but we need more information on threats and trends, and we need to have them reviewed. But just from what we have seen so far, threats to Vitis, some of them are threats that you would expect, any species, especially in the eastern U.S., to experience: development, agriculture, grazing, invasive species. However, grapes, at least some of them, are threatened by a few unique things. So one is genetic swamping or introgression by the cultivated grape. That's especially a threat to Vitis californica. And also spraying along highways or treating native grapes like weeds, which I admit they can be weedy, but when they're treated, as weeds along the highway, etc., and they're just cut down and eradicated, that can be a threat to them. I wanted to talk briefly about hybrid species, but not get into a long discussion about it. If you're interested in conserving hybrid species, it's a topic that I need to learn more about. Feel free to reach out. But there are 3 hybrid species. These are naturally occurring hybrids between 2 native parents, we think. These are the 3 that are recognized by Flora of North America. And in NatureServe's ranking system, hybrids are generally ranked GNA, not applicable, because they're considered not to have conservation value. However, when we actually do rank these hybrids, you can see that 2 of them are quite rare, even rarer than the rupestris. So that's the Champeenii and the Doaniana. And that Novae Angliae is a G3, G4. So it's one of the points that I wanted to make is that when you think about conservation, the lens that you're looking at it through matters in terms of your goals and your decision making. So if you're conserving only to prevent extinction, then these species probably wouldn't be on your list. But if you're conserving for another reason, like importance to agriculture, then you might want to reconsider that. One of the things that we're doing is, one of the parts of doing an assessment is figuring out where it is and making a range map. And with the help of Dan Carver, we are attempting to put together county level range maps for all of the Vitis species. What you're looking at here is a draft map of county level distribution of Vitis rupestris. The counties are color coded according to whether we think they need to be reviewed or not. We're using data from many different sources: USDA plants, BONAP, herbarium specimens, ex situ germplasm collections, and others. And what has been remarkable about this so far is the level of incongruence among the different sources. I did not expect there to be, I expected there to be a range in the middle that stood out as, yeah, we're confident this is where it occurs, and then random points and points on the outside of its range where we needed to look at. And that's actually not what's happened. We're seeing, differences throughout the map, and it's different for different species. So more work here, and we are also going to have these reviewed. So if you are an expert in Vitis and one species or more species or in a certain state, we'd love to have you review these maps. You can just reach out to me. So another important part of the roadmap is I'm moving on from the documentation and assessments to talking about in situ conservation. And 20 or so years ago, Diane Pavek actually worked in my office as a postdoc and did a pretty intensive study on Vitis rupestris, Vitis shuttleworthii, and Vitis monticola, where she went out and explored and collected germplasm, did some analysis. And at the end of it, there were populations of rupestris that were proposed as in situ conservation sites. Now, it says proposed and established, but to my knowledge, none of these were actually ever officially established. I'm not really sure what that means. So this is work that we want to pick up again, but instead of just saying, well, we recommend these sites as in situ conservation sites, we really should or have somebody revisit them to make sure that they are still good sites and it's worth conserving them. One other consideration is that in situ sites for genetic resources have some other considerations than just a regular, protecting species where they occur. And one of those, and the most important one, is probably the ease of access for monitoring and germplasm collection. The idea is that these species are being kept in nature and continuing to evolve with the pests and pathogens and other species around them. But in order for them to be useful and available as germplasm, we have to be able to go back in and collect them. And there's more information about this in this joint strategic framework on the conservation and use of native crop wild relatives in the U.S. that was put together by the Forest Service and the USDA ARS. One other aspect of in situ management and this is something that Carol Spurrier put together for the workshop, is to get a sense from land managing agencies where specifically these species occur and in which forests are protected areas. And so Vitis rupestris is considered a species, it's on the sensitive species list for the southern region. I'm not sure exactly what that means in terms of management, but I think it is given some special, not status, but attention. And so we'd like to explore these and possibly making these in situ genetic resource reserves as well. And the next aspect of the roadmap is ex situ conservation. And for ex situ conservation, we don't conserve everything. We have to be mindful that maintaining ex situ collections over time is quite labor intensive and expensive. And so we have to choose carefully what we want to conserve. The largest collection of grape germplasm in the U.S. is through the USDA National Plant Germplasm System. You can see a map here of where all of the locations are. And I've circled in red two of them. One is Geneva in New York, and the other is Davis in California. That is where the two collections of Vitis are held. I do want to mention that other places are important contributors to crop wild relative preservation, botanic gardens, universities, etc. They are at this point not compiled into a central place or central list, and so it's hard to know what they have. So these are the species that are held in the USDA National Plant Germplasm System. On the left is Geneva, and on the right is Davis. These are just, there is a lot more in the accessions, including vinifera, particularly at Davis, but these are only showing the native species. So that you can see they have quite a representation of the native species here. And Erin Galarno, who's the curator at Geneva, and Claire Heinitz, who's at Davis, are both doing the work to look through and try to figure out what gaps they have in their collection and how they can fill them. Another outcome of the workshop is that we're going to be doing a gap analysis. One thing that we realized is that while we do know a lot, we still actually don't have a great way of identifying gaps in collection and protection of Vitis. And so Dan Carver is leading a project on gap analysis for Vitis. And it is going to be similar to one that was done for cucurbits, for cucurbita. And this is still very much in process right now. It's not ready for prime time. The next to last goal in the roadmap is making germplasm accessible for plant breeding research and education. And what I'm going to do is go back and reference the USDA ARS again, because if people don't know, there is a system through which you can request material to be sent to you free of charge. Now, you can request material if you are a researcher, a breeder, a valid researcher who is going to use this for research purposes. It's not for planting in home gardens and that sort of thing. But if you go to Grin Global and you look through the collection, you can see all of the Vitus collections that are available, and you put them in your cart to request them, and then in the upper right, this is a picture of scions that are basically packaged up and ready for distribution. I think they're scions, buds, whatever. So this is the way that that the USDA makes these accessions accessible. One of the things that I'm curious about is when we're working with botanical gardens or universities or others that have their own collection, what does that accessibility look like? And, is there a way to make it more organized and available? Okay, finally, the last aspect or goal of the roadmap is to raise awareness of the value of native species. And I'm going to mention a couple things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nan to finish out that section. So one of the exciting things that we're doing is that we've organized a symposium on grapevines or Vitus species for the International Botanical Congress. That's going to be in Madrid in 2024. We are accepting abstracts for this symposium. They're due November 30th. So if you are interested in presenting with us, please get in touch with me. I stuck a link in the talk to where the symposium description is, so you can read about it. So we're really looking for a multidisciplinary symposium, and would love to invite anybody who has an interesting topic to join us. The next thing, and this is also another opportunity to participate, some of the workshop attendees put together a special issue on grapes, global status, and future potential. It's with the journal Plants People Planet, and the call for papers just came out October 18th. And manuscripts will be accepted up until April, I think. So there's plenty of time to put something together if you're interested. You can, it's Allison Miller and Colin Corey and actually June Wen, who are the editors. But if you want to participate and don't know how to get in touch with them, you can just contact me and I'll get you in touch. Okay, so from here, I'm going to turn it over to Nan, and she's going to talk about more of the workshop outcomes.
Yeah, so I'm sort of talking about, we have the outcomes that we are objectives sort of from the beginning, but, the great thing about something like this that we were hoping for and that really came to pass was the informal collaboration that you get when you bring lots of people together working from different angles and different expertise on the same topic. And I really like this picture on the left. This is June Wen and Lucy Morton. So June Wen, you all probably know, is a taxonomist of the Vitaceae, and Lucy Morton is an ampelographer, so she studies the grapes in the field, mostly from the perspective of what the leaf looks like to classify grapes. and she's also a wine viticulture consultant worldwide. It was really fun seeing them work together, and this was just as it happened. There was this vine growing at Oak Spring, and they were trying to figure out what it was because the staff at Oak Spring didn't know what this was a heritage grape, so an old heirloom grape of a cross between native Vitis and Vitis vinifera. So anyway, there were just several things that I'd like to bring up that were kind of fun outcomes of this kind of thing. So if we want to move forward with the slide. And one of them was that actually Lucy and June are shown here in the herbarium at the Smithsonian, and actually they're being filmed here on the left because Lucy Morton is very interested. She's been featured in one documentary called Vitis Prohibita, shown here in the bottom right, and there's also another one she's working on called The Odyssey of Forbidden Wines. I won't go into this, but it's about the wines that are they're the crosses between the French American hybrid crosses between the Vitis vinifera and the native grapes, and they're outlawed in France. And it's a long story, and it's a fascinating story. So I really, if you're interested in any aspect of this, I recommend you look into the movie the documentary that's out, and the one that they're still working on. And she was talking to June about just getting input about Vitis estivalis and some of the other Vitis in the Smithsonian that they were looking at. Okay. And speaking of estivalis, it just happens to come up several times right now. I don't know why. So this is Surya Sapkota, who's at the Kearneysville USDA station in West Virginia, and just started the grape breeding program there. He actually just started it. He moved there in December, right after the workshop, which was in November. So that was very exciting. It was a brand new, they just started the grape breeding program at Kearneysville right then. And that was brought into, that was because of these people here shown with Surya. These are Virginia wine growers who really wanted to have grapes bred that are adapted to the mid-Atlantic, as we were talking about before. Vitis vinifera is not adapted to many places in the United States very well, and so you end up doing a lot of spraying and so forth. And so there's a push to get vines that are adapted. This is Lucy and Surya at the symposium where they met, and Surya is one of many people that Lucy is now sending materials to. That she's down here in the lower left. She found these particular specimens of estivalis that differ from one another and have special characteristics, and she's sending these to Surya for his program. So these are the sort of exciting outcomes I think that we see. But go ahead. And also, Lucy also connected Aaron Galarno, shown lower left here. These are researchers from France who were collecting estivalis to look at the leaf microbiome for resistance to some of the mildews. And so they were scouting in Virginia for various places where they could collect these estivalis. And Lucy, being on the ground as she is, knew where these were. So to move ahead. And then in general, I'm actually really interested in this aspect, and I hope it has some, I hope there's some possibility here. I just think if we talk about the hybrids and also the fact that here we have Vitis labrusca, the Concord grape, which is the cross between labrusca and vinifera, which is one of our old heirloom hybrids, which happened naturally when the colonists started bringing over vinifera because they wanted to grow vinifera in the United States, and it would usually die, but the pollen from the vinifera would sometimes get on the female wild vines, and a few times there would be crosses, such as this Concord grape and Norton, which is a well-known hybrid. I think it would be exciting to see if you could get the interest in perhaps drinking hybrid wines rather than pure Vitis vinifera, or not pure, but people like to think of it as pure. And then try to tie that into the importance of the native grapes as crop wild relatives, and really with a broader idea of getting the public to understand the importance of crop wild relatives in general, as another reason to conserve plant biodiversity. Okay, and I know we're about out of time. I have a few native grapes of interest I thought I'd run through if there's time. Is that okay? You stop me, Elizabeth, if it's not.
Nope, keep
Um,
going, you're fine.
okay, so Vitis berlandieri is one of those 3 species that form the rootstock. I'm just going to talk about a couple of these just because this is about grapes. And so so it's endemic to the Edwards Plateau, and so it's coming under threat. Some actually home gardeners. One, that more of the Texas Hill Country has been developed, which has been a problem for it, and then the gardeners who live in those areas are, gardeners cut down vines because they think of them as weeds, and many times they are, of course. But anyway, sometimes what they're cutting down is Vitis berlandieri, which is, as I was saying earlier, important for rootstock worldwide. Okay. Vitis riparia, very widespread grape, but as Anne said, you can still have different populations with genetic traits that you want to preserve. And along with being a rootstock, being bred into rootstock, it's bred in the scion breeding because it's the most cold hardy grape that we have. So Jason Londo and others are working on that. Vitis californica, Anne mentioned, so that is the one that's at great threat. Actually, Andy Walker called it almost extinct in the wild in California. Because of the introgression from the cultivated Vitis vinifera. June Wen tells us that she's concerned about this for the East Coast now that we have so many vineyards here. That there's going to be more and more integration from the domesticated crop into the wild plants. Vitis californica is interesting because it's of ancient hybrid origin, and that is it is sort of a sister to the rest of the Native American grapes because it is a hybrid with the Eurasian clade as well as the American clade. And it's in the secondary gene pool, meaning that it is easier to breed with Vitis vinifera. All the rest of the native grapes that we've talked about, I think, are in the tertiary gene pool. Okay, Linsecumii, I just want to talk about 2 that really illustrate what Anne has brought up, which is that it's interesting when you're thinking about conservation, you have conservation for the sake of conservation itself and conserving biodiversity, and then you have it with the idea of agricultural safeguarding. And I think that this particular species and another one I'm going to mention, the Champinii variety, show that, this became apparent when we were working on assessments, that looking at the economic traits for the assessments, which is something that we do, really brings up a plant that we might not have paid quite as much attention to, except this was really known as a very important part of the breeding history, and it was called the foundation of Thomas Volney Munson's breeding efforts. And he thought it was one of the most remarkable, interesting, and promising to viticulturalists. So it's formed the foundation of some of the older hybrids that we have. Okay. And Champinii also, this is a natural hybrid. So, and this forms important rootstocks. And so, as Anne was saying, NatureServe doesn't always consider the natural hybrids of high conservation value, but in this case, this is important for rootstock, and so it's interesting to look at the economic traits for that reason. And it's threatened, as so many are. There actually are not very many occurrences of this plant that are recorded, and it's thought that perhaps with the decline of rupestris itself, that perhaps there's not perhaps more Vitis by Champinii is not being created in the wild. And let's see, do I have one more? Yeah, okay, Vitis aerosonica. I'm just going to wrap this up quickly. This is very important for Pierce's disease, which is of great concern to wine growers. And so, yeah, I think we can go ahead from there. Okay. And that, yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nan. I just wanted again to thank the partners who have been part of this project from the beginning. We've had our their logos down there, and I've mentioned them, but this was really a collaborative effort over many years. I also want to thank Nan because for part of the time she was employed by NatureServe, but she has actually volunteered way more time than she was compensated for. It really was her passion and her energy really helped bring this through. And I'll just mention one last thing. This was a picture I stuck in at the last minute because I'm so fascinated by it. These are jars. Archaeologists discovered hundreds of jars that contain 5,000-year-old wine. And it belonged to a queen. It's the tomb of Queen, I don't know, Mary, located in Egypt. But anyway, I'm always a fan of a queen with resources and who plans ahead. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the afterlife, but she's set up with her wine. So I will end on that note.